Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to celebrate the launch of the UBC School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. My name is Moura Quayle, and I'm the Director Pro Tem of the new Policy School. Before we proceed, it's important for us to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam peoples, who've called this area home for many thousands of years and continue to do so today. I invite you to take a look on your program at the striking cedar totem pole that was installed across from the UBC bookstore. The post was carved by the talented Musqueam artist Brent Sparrow Jr. and tells the original story of the Musqueam involving a two-headed serpent. And now we are pleased to welcome Musqueam elder and one of our favorite elders, Larry Grant, to provide us with a traditional welcome. Larry, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Great time to be here. I'm Larry Grant. I'm from the Musqueam First Nation, also resident elder at the First Nations House of Learning and adjunct professor in the First Nations and Endangered Language Program. And I would like to say a few words in Hunkaminam, the language of this land. Tiatalatan Taswalap Inamat Huiti Tasal Samokat from Musqueam. Steaguanas Yuenas, Capelano, I Hultimoto, Setta something need Taswalap, I Hiloxtala. And I Tinishqualawan, Cus New Arthang, Cus Hiloxtala, Tanawale, High Tapka. Just want to say thank you for having me here and recognizing the Musqueam territory. I'm a descendant of Capelano and Quiltimoto, who were here to greet the first Spanish ship to arrive here under Captain Narvaez and the first English ship to arrive here under Captain George Vancouver. It's my pleasure to raise my hands and welcome to all of you here at UBC on the traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. And as we know that through all the court cases, the underlying rights and title are still there, it's time for us to prove it. But I also, in that vein, speak of policy. Having us here to do protocol greetings is part of policy that has been long established between our communities all throughout the Lower Mainland and Washington State and up north. So that's part of our policy, and Capelano was our warrior that lived here on the point here and protected the lands and the resources of our people and helped to maintain the laws that we call teachings. So that's part of our history, and it's just a little bit of our protocol that's quite important today. And I want to say welcome here at the Liu Center at UBC on the Point Grey Musqueam campus. So it's very important to understand that as unceded lands, it is still part of the Musqueam territory, and this is where the University of British Columbia is situated today. So I raise my hand and welcome. UBC Taniti Tamokat from Musqueam. Thank you.
Thank you for that welcome, Elder Grant. I want to recognize some special people in the room. We are very excited that the Liu family has joined us for today's program, which concludes with a special tribute to Dr. J.J. Liu, who played an instrumental role in the creation of the Liu Institute for Global Issues at UBC in 2000. So we welcome a row of sons and daughters and want to applaud and wave at us, and we'll... So we're very excited to have the Liu family with us today. We also have a number of distinguished guests in the audience, Mr. David Choi, Ms. Jacqueline Kerner, Ms. Joy McPhail, Mr. Preston Manning, Mr. Ernest Yee, Ms. Olga Illich, Ms. Sarah Miller-McCune, Ms. Rigi Asadi, Mr. Fareed Rahani, Mr. Dave Chessman, Mr. Christian Hansen, Mr. Paul Sampson, Mr. David Hsu, Mr. Julian Braun, and Julie Compton, and two senators, Senator Wampal Wu and Senator Mobina Jaffer. Please, you're welcome. Gage and I would also very much want to thank our policy school advisory members, the policy school and the Masters of Public Policy and Global Affairs partners and potential partners for the future of the policy school, with a special shout out to UBC Okanagan and the kinds of connections we want to make to all the policy expertise there. We also want to thank the Masters of Public Policy and Global Affairs co-op employers and mentors who are here with us today. You're going to be applauding a lot. You know, it's a launch. That's what you do. So thank you. And of course, why do we do all this? Well, it's all about students. So with the energy of the new year and new students, it's an exciting time to be on campus. And UBC's Masters of Public Policy and Global Affairs, we're entering our third year. Our faculty and staff are excited to welcome our 41 new MPPGA candidates, and we're so delighted to learn of your diverse backgrounds, your ambitions, and to see you connecting with one another and with the faculty and staff. So could this new cohort, what we call our 2017 cohort, please stand up and be welcomed? Oh. So exciting to have you here. And then, of course, as important is when students return to the second year of the program. It's kind of key to keeping things going. So I'd like to ask our returning MPPGA students who are here to stand up and be acknowledged. Please. Ed. And we're also excited about the fact that we actually have alumni now. We've graduated our first cohort, and a few of our cohort are here. I mean, we are a global program, so people have scattered to the wind. But please, MPPGA alumni, please stand. Whoa! Corinne! Corinne, you realize that you're representing another 14 people, but, you know, yeah. Yeah, that's right, that's right. So today we're celebrating the coming together of various units under one school. The UBC Policy School will really be striving to lead the way in public policy research, innovation, and learning. And we're going to do this as an interdisciplinary hub for innovation and learning in the support of the Institute of Asian Research, the Liu Institute of Global Issues, the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, and the Canadian International Resources and Development Institute, as well as other UBC faculties and in collaboration with local and global communities. So researchers, policymakers, aspiring change makers who make up the policy school will find a rich and collaborative place to explore both local and global issues, find policy solutions, and change the world for the better. So we've invited a provocative list of speakers from on and off campus to provide us with some vision about how they see the shaping of our new policy school and their thoughts on the policy issues of the day, how we can best prepare our students as policy leaders to address this range of local and global concerns. So to get to a broader audience, we're live streaming this event for that audience and live tweeting from our new Twitter account at UBC Policy School. So those of you inclined to be tweeters, carry on. We're also photographing the event, so please let the photographer know if you absolutely do not want to be photographed. But we hope not. We'd like to record the event. We've also invited Sam Brad, there we go, a graphic facilitator to record the insight shared by the speakers and by all of you to be a kind of a legacy piece for this launch of the policy school and to make the point that it is about communicating. We want to make sure that the policy school is a place of convening and communicating. So we invite you to share your input at the breaks by writing your vision for the policy school on various Post-it notes on various windows. So unfortunately, our president is not on campus today, and so we now turn to a video of remarks from Professor Santa J. Ono, our 15th president and Vice-Chancellor. And here he comes. There he is. Click.
It is such a pleasure to be part of this momentous occasion. Although I cannot be with you in person today, I would like to extend my best wishes for the opening of the UBC School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. The school will play a critical part in regional, national, and global policy debates and will help unravel the complex international issues that demand our attention today. As North America's most international university, UBC is uniquely positioned to contribute to the dialogue on global issues, with the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs playing a central role. I know the entire UBC community joins me in welcoming the new School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. I wish to extend a special welcome to the Liu family. I'm happy to know that J.J. Liu is being honored at a tribute ceremony later this afternoon. I'd also like to welcome the Policy School faculty, staff, returning MPPG students, and the incoming class of global changemakers. I know you will make a vital contribution to our scholarship and to an increasing understanding of the complexities of global affairs. Congratulations to Director Pro Tem, Professor Moura Quayle, and all the faculty, staff, and students of this new school on this tremendous achievement. Thank you, all of you, who worked so hard to make this occasion possible. Welcome to the UBC family.
We very much appreciate Professor Ono's support as we move forward in developing our school as a UBC policy school. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to the UBC Dean of Arts, Gage Averill, to provide his reflections on the new school. Gage is an ethnomusicologist specializing in the popular music of the Caribbean and in North American vernacular music. It's always fun to go into Gage's office because he's sometimes singing. Hey. His research interests include the relationship of music to power, the cultural geography of music, including globalization, and the role of music in peace and conflict. We'll be asking him to be part of the policy school soon, too. Gage.
Thanks, everyone. I was looking at the students standing up just a minute ago, and I was thinking about an interaction I had fairly recently when I visited the my corner grocery store in my neighborhood. The woman recognized me from graduation, and her son was a graduate of our school, and she began to recount his experiences in the last couple of years. It's been a few years now. Left school to go teach English in Spain, went to visit, I believe, it was Bosnia, and at that moment, a vast migration of human beings coming from war-torn Middle East began to stream through the nations of the Southern Balkans. He began to work with the NGOs and others who were assisting the migrants, started to move with that migration as it went through Europe, providing aid wherever he could. He's gone back to school to work on these issues, on policy in Ireland. But I was thinking just a minute ago, what would have happened if we actually trained him to do this? This is what UBC students are out doing. And when I was joking with Moura, saying the other 14, other than our one alumnus, are out changing the world, but I truly believe that that is what they're doing. We're here to celebrate the launch of the policy school, the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. But we should all be asking ourselves why, right? Why was it necessary to do that at this time? There's certainly enough policy schools in the world, aren't there? And why at UBC? We're not in a provincial capital. We're not in the national capital. And so it is an unlikely spot to launch this at this point in time. So I'm going to provide you with just a little bit of context on the Faculty of Arts, which is its parent here. It's faculty. But since I've been here with my team, we've been, and with the support from the university, focused on building a Faculty of Arts of impact, building its global focus and its integration in the community. We wanted a faculty that integrates thoughtful preparation for careers into a liberal arts education, and a faculty that builds resources, enduring, sustainable resources for the university, for the Lower Mainland and BC, for Canada and the world. Along the way, we've helped to bring to fruition the Vancouver School of Economics, with its Bachelor of International Economics, another globally focused program, New Media Studies program, the Institute for Critical Indigenous Studies, and other programs and units that we think will be a part of this mission to produce a better world. The question that has occupied us since the beginning is, how do we take the resources of this great institution, its students, thousands of bright, energized students who come through this university every year, its brilliant faculty, its resources, its facilities, its connections to the world, and mobilize them most efficiently, to change the world for the better, I think, to use the phrase you were just using, Moura. We've entered a century in which the hierarchy of global power relationships will be fundamentally shifted. We know that these kinds of transitions can be not only chaotic, but violent. And I wonder, in the years ahead, whether the Euro-American alliance that grew out of the 20th century will face this with nationalist narratives, isolationist policies, protectionist economic initiatives, or will it face it in a new, creative way? We're facing the most global of challenges in the constellation, the perfect storm of climate change, of species eradication, of environmental degradation. And do we, in response, deny scientific evidence, perpetuate the kinds of exploitive practices that have produced the crisis which we face? And with steady gains on a number of fronts around the world in human welfare, we nonetheless see this massive inequities persist across the globe amongst First Nations peoples at home, in former colonies, indeed within the most developed global economies. Poverty, food insecurity, lack of access to clean water, all of which produce not only persistence of dreaded diseases, but new diseases that are ravaging populations around the world. So we have these festering problems playing out in political systems worldwide, and we see challenges as a result to the expansion and the strengthening of democracies that we thought were moving ahead so well, right? Within this policy school, I was just talking with Preston Manning earlier, who has brought an idea to us that we're working on for the training of future legislators. Been talking with Professor Cameron early this morning about his work in the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions and the work of a donor, Stephen Jaroslawski, and other pieces around this puzzle that are not just going to try to expand democratic practice and democratic engagement, but fundamentally improve it, to experiment with democratic process and to challenge us to move this ahead in the world. So our response to these challenges is going to take a fundamental reordering. It's not just running policies through the mill. We really need to rethink our technological and scientific priorities and capacities, our social fabric, our cultures, our political systems. We've got to dislodge inherited ideas and concepts and test innovative new approaches. The engine of innovation that constitutes this university has to be better connected to and better enmeshed in the private, the public, and the NGO sectors globally. So we're testing ideas, we're sharing them, we're enacting new legislation and practices, and we're speeding up the process of human adaptation to the challenges that we're facing. So you can get the feeling, and you'd be totally correct, that I don't see this school primarily training future civil servants, although I'd love to train future civil servants. We need great politicians, we need great civil servants, but we need a mobilized, focused, evidence-based mechanism to put solutions into practice. So it's my hope that our UBC's new School for Public Policy and Global Affairs, with its professional master's degree, and we see the fruits of that degree here in the room today, will be the catalyst for these changes. It's designed to serve as a university hub for innovative policy relevant research and programs, from medicine to forestry to applied science to various units within the Faculty of Arts, First Nations and Aboriginal Studies, for example. UBC is fortunate to inhabit a very particular bit of real estate that Elder Grant referred to early. First of all, on unceded First Nations territory, we are reminded daily of the struggle to produce a new and mutually respectful relationship in this nation and nations around the world between Indigenous and settler populations. We're in a province where there are more discussions over treaty than anywhere in the world over treaties. We're in a province that has more cultural diversity and linguistic diversity than any similar piece of real estate on the planet. We have a memorandum of agreement with the Musqueam people that was formative in Canada. We heard earlier, Moura gave a version of the protocol where we recognize this. That protocol has influenced every university in Canada. If you go to something like this, on just about any university, you will see people recognize their relationship to First Nations people. And I note this to emphasize the leading role that UBC can play and must play in this province and in this nation on First Nations Aboriginal policy, one of those policies being the recognition. Thank you, Larry, for mentioning that. This was also the university that developed the notion of the carbon footprint, right? And the campus as a living lab. It's known globally for its research and its praxis in sustainability, environmental care. We're in the center of one of the most natural settings in America, in North America, and we're also home to so many industries focused on dealing, in some cases, on the extraction of minerals, wood, sea resources, and other resources. So there are many reasons why UBC should remain and grow as that resource that helps North America and the world deal with issues of sustainability and environment. We're also in the southwest of Canada, in what some people call Cascadia, linked to universities and cities up and down this coast, but in direct contact with the Pacific Rim and with Asia. We are, as it was mentioned earlier, the most international university in Canada, and Mr. Campbell asked why, and that's our ranking in the international rankings based on a whole range of issues: student body, faculty, international partnerships, on and the curriculum. So we're a natural academic partner for the exploration of policy that links North America and Asia, and for rethinking East and West in the challenging times to come. I could go on about our potential to host a new kind of policy school unbound by traditions that plague many of our sister policy schools around North America, and to prepare us to engage and to thrive in a new century. I was asked to weigh in on how a policy school of the future should think, research, teach, and act, but in fact, I'm here to learn what you think about those issues. So I'm going to leave that to the rest of you. Thank Moura for stepping into the role as our founding director of the school, and also to thank all of those community partners and faculty members, students, staff, who took years of work to make this happen. Thank you very much for being here, everyone. Great to see our students, and enjoy the day. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gage. Fantastic to have a leader who can conceptualize our future like that. So I really appreciate it. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Gordon Campbell. Gordon is the CEO of Hawksmuir International Partners. He's also, and there's a list, the former Canadian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, the former Premier of British Columbia, the former Mayor of Vancouver. And so we're really excited to hear his insights on policy making and our policy school. I can't resist a little bit of a personal introduction. So Philip Steenkamp and I have both experienced Mr. Premier as our boss. And forever, of course, he will be Mr. Premier. You just don't, sorry, you aren't really Gordon, you're Mr. Premier. He has a remarkable capacity to devour books, frequently about policy and global issues. The public service would go into panic mode after Mr. Premier would take a holiday, and along with him, a huge stack of books. This was before Kindle, so he had to take an extra suitcase. And he'd come back with this amazing array of great ideas, which would on one hand be totally exciting, and on the other hand be frightening, because what about the budget? What about all the other ideas we were working on? But this intellectual energy and leadership doesn't happen often. So I'm so happy that you've agreed to share your current thoughts and ideas with us today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Moura, and thank you all for coming to here today and to be part of this. I want to start by congratulating UBC. I think to have a School of Public Policy and Global Affairs is incredibly important as we look out into the 21st century. And here's something that's really important, I think, for all of you, particularly you students. People like Preston and I, not so important for us because we're older than you. But here's the thing that I think is really critical. If you read those words, become a global change maker. Pretty easy to write them on a poster. Pretty easy to say them. I think one of the major issues that you face, and we face in the world today, is that the idea of change is not something that most people get excited about. So just imagine this. You're at work, and your supervisor or your boss or whatever you call him or her come in and says, "Okay, you guys, there's going to be some big changes around here." How many people do you think are going to stand up and say, "Yeah, change, let's do that"? Most people are rushing to keep up, just like Moura said. They're rushing to keep up what they did yesterday or the day before or the week before, and the deadlines they're facing tomorrow and the next week and the week after. And change is disruptive. It makes you do something that is actually pretty difficult. You have to think about it. It's not something you do by habit. And here's something that you should recognize. When you're talking about change, you're also talking about resistance to change. I was involved in public life for a long time. I can't tell you how many times people said to me, "You can't do that. Totally unrealistic. Can't be done." Time after time. In fact, the things that I think that I look back on and say, I'm pleased that I did that, I feel like it was a real contribution, almost always I was told, it cannot be done. Don't waste your time. Don't bother me with this. Let's talk about the color of the brochure. The color of the brochure doesn't matter. The words don't matter. What you do matters. And how you do it matters. And I think that's a really critical thing for each of you to say. I'm now almost into my 7th decade. Right? And you see these? They're called glasses. I was told that I needed glasses when I was 8 years old. And so I put on my glasses. And I used to play baseball, and I always took my glasses off to play baseball. And when I was about 12, I had this idea. Why don't I put my glasses on when I'm playing baseball? And maybe I'll see the ball better when I see baseball. And you know, the first game after I put my glasses on, I was hitting the ball all the time. It was incredible what happens when you wear the right glasses. So as I look at the people that are going to be part of this program, the students that are coming here, I want you to know this. Your glasses are much better than my glasses when you look at the 21st century. They are so much better. Let me put this in another way. We need you. We need you to think differently. We need you to tell us where we're missing it. Because I guarantee you I'm missing it. And one of the things you're up against is that people are far, far more comfortable with talking about old problems than they are talking about new solutions. New solutions are challenging. They are tough. It requires a completely different mindset because we're not used to them. You know, I've had about 30 some odd years of experience in public life. You know, all those experiences are still things that inform what I say, and I'm glad to share those experiences with people, but I don't have any illusions about it. Your life and your challenges are different than my life and my challenges were. Right? They are now my challenges as well. So I want you just to listen to this quote and try and keep it. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew. We must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country. Now, the person that said that was Abraham Lincoln. It was 1862. So when we sit here in our 21st century lives and think, boy, we're suffering from huge changes here, we can't keep up with the changes, we should recognize, really, change has always been there. It has always challenged us. And to be a change maker is different than just being part of the change. It's actually saying, I want to go somewhere. I want to do something. You need to think anew. And then, if you're only thinking about it and talking about it and doing a study and putting it on the shelf about it, you're not a change maker. You can tell yourself you are, but you're not. You have to help people do the right things. You have to help people change what they do. So I'm really pleased to be here today. And I look at the people here and the people that I knew here from here. Preston Manning was a change maker. He had a different idea. And then he stood for it. And he took hits for it. And he was told he was wrong for it. But he believed it, and he told people about it, and he built a whole different level of public literacy about how government works and how government should work. Philip Steenkamp and Moura were both with me as deputy ministers. I can tell you our political elected leaders, all of them, from all parties, regardless of what you may think, are trying to make the world better. Sometimes they're very frightened about what they can do. Sometimes they don't stand up and they don't take the leadership role that you think they will do. Sometimes they haven't thought about what's new. They haven't thought about what actions they should take. They feel good about what they say, but you have to feel good about what you do. To take the challenge of the status quo. To take that on and to fight it. Now, one of the people that's here today, I'm also very pleased to be here with Larry Grant, and many times he's welcomed me to Musqueam territories, and I appreciate that, Elder Grant. Thank you very much. But I'm also here with Kim Baird. So you're going to hear from Kim Baird. So I can tell you, Kim Baird is a leader. Kim Baird is someone who understood what leadership was, and still does, I'm sure, but she gathered her community together. And she came and she sat at one side of the table across from the BC government, and we talked about how we could create the first urban treaty, the first modern urban treaty in British Columbia. Guess what? Being first is tough. Stepping outside that door or through that door it's tough. There's always going to be someone that tells you they could do better. There's always going to be someone that tells you that they could do more. There's always going to be someone that tells you you're not doing enough. There's always going to be someone that says to you, gee, we've never done it that way. And I'll never remember, I don't know if you remember this, Kim, but we had a ceremony in the legislature when we had ratified the Tsawwassen First Nation Treaty. And Kim came into the Premier's office and we were having a press conference. And the media, in their own inimitable way, said to her, Chief, you didn't get everything you wanted, did you? Sort of a little bit aggressive. And Kim said, of course. But this is 1,000% better than we've ever had before, and I think it's time for my community to build a future, and I want to build the future, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's a leader. So I'm really pleased that you're here today, because I think the things that Kim Baird experienced and she can share with you are going to be exceptional for all of you as you think about your future and the public policy that you'd like to develop and the way you'd like to put it in place, execute it. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. You are going to be up against some pretty significant challenges. So you're going to fight three tyrannies. Three tyrannies that are there every day, and they're quiet. You don't get to see them, really. They're just there. There's the tyranny of the status quo. The status quo is that thing that we live in today. We think that tomorrow is not going to be different. It's going to be different. How many of you actually go through your day and think, geez, I have so much time I'd like to do is take on something new? How many of you are feeling that way today? Like, just later today, if anything new, I just like to do it. Any of you feeling that? No one feels that in today's world. It's certainly here. Because, it's always something. How many of you have one of these? Any of you have one of these? Brand new. We all have them. And guess what? They're always there. Mine's turned off right now because I'm so fascinating to me. Hi there. Hold on. Let me take a selfie. Yeah, it's always there. It's ubiquitous. Your challenges, your deadlines, the urgency of the tyranny of the urgent is important, but the tyranny of the status quo is overwhelming. I can tell you politically in my life, my political life, whether it was as mayor, as the chairman of the Greater Vancouver Regional District, as the leader of the opposition, as premier, even as high commissioner, right? The way we used to do things, even if it's not getting us where we want to go, is just so much more powerful than we know. Because one of the things about public policy is it includes the public. It includes every one of us in this room. That's why the diversity of the class or the entering group is so important, because you will have a different perspective. So I was born in Vancouver, lived here most of my life. I went to university in New Hampshire. Hard to believe, but living and going to school in New Hampshire is completely different than living and going to school at the University of British Columbia. Different perspectives, different experiences. I went through the Vietnam challenges that students faced. I sat there and watched as my American colleagues or friends stood there and watched on television as they drew their birth date out of a hat to decide whether they were going to go to Vietnam or not. I was a Canadian. Didn't faze them, didn't think about it. I thought about it for them, but not about it for me. The perspectives we have are different. I then went to Nigeria and taught for 2 years in Nigeria in a little town called Yola. 3 blocks of a single-lane tarmac road, mud huts on either side. The department store had sort of processed cream cheese and a couple of boxes of noodles. That's what they had there, right? I rode everywhere around Nigeria on a motorcycle. It was completely different than my experience. And in my experience in Nigeria at that point, they were making changes with the use of bullets, not the use of ballots. And I still think one of the things that meant to me was it reminded me of how lucky we are to live in a place where we make change with ballots, with energy, with ideas, with commitment. It's not easy to make change, but you can make change. Country like Canada, you can make change. And you can make change for the better by bringing people together, by listening to them, by hearing what they have to say, by setting a goal, and then by acting to move towards it. So the dogmas of the quiet past, They're inadequate for today. So we have to think anew and act anew. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of this from my experience. So I was the mayor of Vancouver. I was elected mayor of Vancouver in 1986. There's a part of Vancouver called False Creek today. You look at False Creek today, it's a completely different place than it was in 1986. So the city and Marathon Realty had made an agreement in 1974. They couldn't get anywhere. The province acquired the site, I think it was 1980, 1981. And they were going to have Expo there, but they were trying to prepare for what would take place in the first neighborhood. Couldn't get anywhere. And here's why I think they couldn't get anywhere. The city hadn't decided what they wanted to happen there. So this seems simple, but it's actually pretty important. I had been in the development community. I came and I said to the city, and I said, and our council, let me just say this, I just said I came. Councils do it, a mayor doesn't. Legislatures do it, a premier does it. You always have to have other people that are working to help you accomplish something. That's a very important thing to remember. But one of the things that I observed was, the city never goes out and says to people, this is what we want. And so we took a year, and we went out to people, and we said, what do you want? And we came up with 16 guiding principles. And this was the tough part, which you have to do, I think. We said, if you want to do a development on the North Shore of False Creek, you have to meet each of these 16 guiding principles. These are not up for debate. So show us how you meet all the principles, you can go ahead. If you don't meet all the principles, don't bother us. Don't waste our time, don't waste your time and your effort. And I think that was the key that unlocked the opportunities of the North Shore of False Creek. And by unlocking the opportunities of the North Shore of False Creek, where we said simple things, but important things that established a framework. We said to people, there has to be a 50-foot setback from the water. That's public space. People are going to walk along there. I remember going out to the UBC golf course as mayor and saying, I want to see you get on the seawall at the convention center downtown and walk around Stanley Park and walk around the south part of the downtown peninsula and walk all the way out to UBC. Now, we've got pretty close to that now. We wouldn't have got there if we didn't say that's what we're expecting. That's your job as a development community. Now they have some certainty. Now they can move forward. So we did that not just in False Creek. We did it right in the waterfront. We did it in Yaletown, which is the hole in the donut between False Creek and downtown Vancouver. But it was our job to say this is what we expect. And then we allowed the private sector to say, here's what we're going to try and do to meet it. And I think those are pretty exceptional neighborhoods now. And people come from all over the world and say, look at Vancouver, it's a great place to live. Those policy commitments are important. Greater Vancouver Regional District was 18 municipalities when I was the chair of the regional district. And we were trying to create a new policy for basically creating our future, we called it. And it was a process that went through. And what I realized was certain councillors would go to the regional district and everyone else would stay at home. So the first thing we did was we went out and I talked to all of the councils. And I asked them to say, what did they want the region to be like? And we created an institution called the Council of Councils, where every councillor was invited to come and the region would report. We'd talk about how we could do things differently and better. And that then creates a public objective that says, let's go forward together. There's where we're aiming for. I'll just tell you, this is something that's really important to know. If you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to get there. Really difficult. And there's dozens of ways to get to a destination, but you have to set the destination. So that's in the city. But the same principles apply in terms of how you move things forward to the province. You have to know where you want to go. You have to know what you're trying to do. You have to set objectives. And then you have to listen to people about how you might get there. I'll just give you a brief example of this. When we decided to move forward on the initiatives with regard to climate change, we created a cabinet committee. And the cabinet committee was there to hear from all of this, well, not all, but 12 different industry sectors. Virtually every single one of those sectors came in and said to us, it's so good you're doing with this. We're so glad you're taking on this challenge of climate change. But you have to understand one thing. We don't have anything to do with it. And the challenge is to say to them, and which I did say, is actually you do. We all have something to do with it. Each of us as an individual, each of us as an industrial sector. So tell us the principles that you would like us to try and embrace as we go forward. And they did. And it was a pretty constructive process. And I think we came up with a public policy that I still think is it's kind of the benchmark that others should strive for. I think the revenue neutral carbon tax was critically important because it showed we were talking about the climate, not talking about government just going and digging more money out of your pocket. I think it gave us an opportunity to try and get people to change their ideas. And equally important, it said to you, you decide. I'm glad to have you pay more carbon tax if you want. Buy a big car, fill your boots. Buy a small car, you won't pay as much carbon tax. That's just how it works. But instead of going and saying, you should do this, as I remember I had a friend who was very actively engaged in the environment community, and she was coming and telling me, this is when I was mayor, you should do this, and you should do this and this. And I said, but what are you doing? And she was driving around a great big Mercedes and doing whatever. And I said, that's just not, there's no coherence there. You have to be consistent with that. And this gave people the opportunity to make their choice about that. It also, by the way, gave industry and the economy an opportunity to retool. They're all looking for productivity gains. They can get productivity gains. They can reduce their costs with those productivity gains and those emission reductions. There was lots of things like that happened and that worked. But I think that happened, and the reason the public generally accepted it was because it was about the environment. It was not about gathering more money into the government. So I think that revenue neutrality was critically important. And then setting goals was important. Now, people will say to me, yeah, but we've all seen that those goals can change. They can. And they change if we let them change. If we get fooled by the words. Because the words don't matter if the actions don't follow. Words are just the words. What are we actually going to do? And if you look at public policy, I think you have to say these are the actions that reflect our public policy is getting us where we want to go. So I'm going to give you one more example of this. This is from my experience in London. I was sent to London. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs said, we want you to look at what we're doing at Canada House. We've got these two buildings, or different parts of the city, and we have to do something with Canada House. Both of them need to be completely upgraded. So I went and I talked to the department and said, what are you thinking of doing? And the department said, well, we're thinking of buying this building and we're going to do this, and then we'll tear that building down and build a new building and put the official residence on top, and then we'll sell that building and we'll pay for it. That was all fine. And I said, well, what about Canada House? They said, we haven't got to Canada House yet. The whole purpose was Canada House. But they'd been distracted by the real estate thing, right? So I said, well, we have to say this is about Canada House. I said, how long do you think it'll take you to do that? They said, we think we can get it done by 2017. This was in 2011. 2017. I said, you guys, that's 50% longer than it took us to fight the Second World War and win it. We're not going to be doing this, right? This is one real estate development project. And we haven't done anything. So let's do something with Canada House. What are we going to do? Well, it's too small. We can't do that. I said, well, how do we make it bigger? Well, we can't make it bigger. I said, well, why don't we buy the building that's right beside it? You can't do that. Well, why can't I do it? Because those people never sell. Well, get me a meeting. We'll go and we'll talk to them about it. Don't waste your time, High Commissioner. Those people have a reputation in London. They never sell. Okay, 2 weeks later I call and I say, have we got the meeting? Well, we haven't. High Commissioner, really, it's just don't do it. I said, you've got two choices now. I'll get me a meeting or you get me a meeting, but I'm having a meeting. So we get the meeting. And I go in and they say, I go through this. This is a Canada House. It was Canada's first High Commission in the United Kingdom. It's really important to us. Canada and the UK are very closely related. And, this is the only building in London that will work for us. And we really need to come to an arrangement where we can acquire the building. And from the other side of the table, the guy looks at me and says, we don't sell. I said, I know you don't sell. I know you don't want to sell. We'll make sure that we've got your legal costs covered, your financing costs, all the transaction costs. We'll agree together on what the value of the building is. But really, we need, and I was really good. I had tears in my face. It was phenomenal. I said, we really need this building. And the guy says, I understand that, but really we don't sell. And then he said the key words. But I'll ask my board of directors. He goes to his board of directors, and all of you, public policy and a global affairs discipline should think about this. He goes to his board of directors. Sitting on his board of directors is someone I did business with when I was mayor of Vancouver and has visited me 2 or 3 times as premier of the province of British Columbia. Now, I'm sure that's not the reason they agreed to sell, but I'm sure it didn't hurt. And so this building that we could never buy, we bought. And we never would have bought it if we didn't try. And you notice they said we couldn't do it. It can't be done. But we did do it, and it was done. And we now have in Canada House, the Canada House has been, I think, from everyone's observations, a big success. We have all 10 provinces are represented with provincial rooms, provincial art on the wall, provincial designers for the carpet, provincial furnishings. So it's not just this Canada, it's all the parts of Canada that come together. And people come to Canada House and they want to see their room. One of the assistant deputy minister came on a tour once. She says to me, I was doing the tour, and she says, well, there's no Nunavut room. And I said, yes, there is. And I took her to the Nunavut room. So she was obviously pleased to see the room. But that was a project that reflects Canada in the 21st century, that reflects the difference and the variety and the diversity of Canada. That was something that and to be fair to the people at Global Affairs, a lot of them have said, this is great, we love what you did. The finance minister loved it. We sent over $300 million home as part of the real estate transaction. It was a great thing, right? So that public policy became something that changed how Canada is perceived in the United States. 36,000 people went through Canada House in the first year that it was open. And they learned a little bit about Canada. They learned about John A. Macdonald and Wilfrid Laurier and William Lyon Mackenzie King and Sir Robert Borden. They learned about First Nations. They come into the British Columbia room. There's beautiful First Nations art in British Columbia room. Everyone was part of that. It became a different kind of representation of Canada. And people said to me when we finished, they said, why don't we do this everywhere? And here's why. Because it's not always easy to do it that way. It's not easy to find quality. It's not easy to deliver quality. But it's worth it. And that's one of the things that Canada has. We can deliver quality to the world. We can show the world how they can do things. We can show the world how to think anew and to act anew. Not because we've got it all right, but because we're willing to learn from the world. So all of you here are very fortunate. You're here from other parts of the world. You're here from other parts of Canada. You're here from British Columbia. You get to be global citizens. You get to discover different cultures in different parts of the world. You get to learn and to listen and to think anew and to change your frameworks and put on a new pair of glasses, and you'll start hitting the ball a lot better. And your generation is who we depend on for doing that. We depend on you to do it. And the School of Public Policy, by providing you with the tools you need to think anew, and I would hope the tools you need to act anew, will make a big difference. So as you challenge the tyranny of the status quo, as you challenge the tyranny of wishful thinking, the people who say to you, let me close my eyes, that problem's going to go away. The problems aren't going away. There is a litany of problems that we have to face, and they're difficult. And it's tough sometimes to look at them, because it requires us to look at ourselves. When we look at ourselves and we think of what we want the principles, the values of Canadians to be internationally, we have an obligation to look at ourselves and see what the principles and values we have as Canadians nationally and provincially and locally. And sometimes the first person you have to deal with in dealing with the tyranny of the status quo is the person that looks back to you from the mirror. You know, you've been successful. You guys are successful. You guys are lucky. You're lucky. So now take some of that luck and give it to some other people. The tyranny of the status quo, the tyranny of wishful thinking, the tyranny of willful blindness. How many of you heard people say maybe something like this, climate change is not an issue? Any of you heard that? Well, it is rife out there. And that's willful blindness. If you look at all the climate models, all the things that they predict and they project, they're there. How can you turn your back on that and say, no, there's no climate change? I don't see it. Even in British Columbia, I don't see any climate change here. We've just lost 80% of our pine forest because of climate change. We were waiting for a cold winter, no winter came. Right? So 80% went. So then what happens? Well, the first thing that starts happening is you have dead trees. Here's something a lot of people don't think about. Dead trees don't drink any water. When they don't drink any water, the water table changes. When they don't drink any water, the forest fire seasons change. It's like throwing a dry cedar bough on the fire at Christmas time. It's just whoop. You notice that we've had some of our worst forest fire seasons ever are right now? That's a symptom, I would suggest, of climate change. So we don't get to look away. And we certainly don't get to look away generationally. I've been lucky. I had all the good stuff. Our job now is to make sure that the next generation gets the good stuff and better stuff. And the generation after that gets the good stuff and better stuff. The litany of problems and challenges we face is enormous. So as you look at it, I would suggest, I would hope, don't look at it and be overwhelmed by it. Find something that you want to focus on. Find something that you think is important. And when you do that, remember this. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. That doesn't mean it's easy. But I can tell you this. If you follow that, it will be rewarding, and you'll be able to say to yourself, I did something that made the world a better place. I was a global change maker. Thank you very much. I think I'm allowed to take some questions now if you'd like to, if you have any. Any questions? They've got to be easy. Things like how many provinces in Canada, stuff like that. Yeah?
Hi, I'm Ollie Campbell. First, no relation to anything.
Well, we're related.
A first-year student on the MPGA programme. The question I've got relates to the rise of populism and the disregard of experts. The population in the UK disregarded the experts with regard to Brexit. Could argue that the population south of the border has disregarded the expert opinion, particularly on something like climate change. How do we close the gap between the experts, which we will hope to be, and the population?
Right. Well, the first thing I want to tell you this, without being too harsh about it, is don't ever call yourself an expert. You're part of the population, and you have to talk with the population. You have to communicate with the population. So I was in the UK during the Brexit vote, and when Michael Gove said we don't really care about the experts anymore. And I was also in the UK after they decided on Brexit, and when the people from Cornwall, who voted about 60% for Brexit, were told they weren't going to get all the money that the European Union was used to sending them. And the people from Cornwall said, well, we didn't know that. Well, that's a communication failure for all of us. And it's one of the things that I think is most important in terms of public life. Public life invites public debate and public discussion. It doesn't invite public agreement. It doesn't invite, oh yeah, whatever you say. It invites us to engage in that discussion. And I honestly think, this is really candid, I have never seen a worse campaign than was run by the, what were they called, the Remain group. Right? So first, it was a ridiculous referendum to call, I believe. It was a political call. Secondly, they couldn't. You can't threaten people in an open public society. You can't threaten people to your position, right? So, and that's what I felt like they were doing. So they had an obligation. All of them, the business community, everyone that's now saying, "Well, how did we get here?" should say, "What did they do to stop us from getting there?" And there wasn't nearly enough public discussion about it. I'll tell you an experience that I had from when I was mayor of Vancouver. In the late 1980s, there was a lot of people coming from all of Canada, and there was sort of the banner headlines were Hawksmuir and the Asian invasion. Right? And one of the things I said, we have to talk about this. And people would come to me and they'd say, I'm not a racist, but da-da-da-da. But this is important. I do think this is important. They don't think that they're being racist, and so you have to accept that they are not a racist. So we had what we called city dialogues. And we set them up where we had some people, actually they were from UBC and SFU, they came and they talked to the public about what the facts were. What was the information there that they should be aware of? Not in a condescending way. They were just sharing the facts. So we had about 600 people. Well, the first meeting was about 600 people at Robson Square. And I said, there's some ground rules here. The first is, before we stand up and have a conversation, it's important for you to get some facts. So we had some facts. So here's a fact. There were about 5,000 people that had moved into Greater Vancouver or Vancouver from China and Hong Kong. About 5,000, and Taiwan. About 5,000. There were 50,000 that had come from Ontario. There were 32,000 that had come from Alberta. So it was pretty hard to see how this 5,000 group was the ones that were really driving all this change. It was just that Vancouver was a very popular place to come at that time. So the next group came, and one of the things that you heard was, oh, all the immigrants take all of our money, and they use all our services, and they don't pay their fair share. So the guy stands up and says, well, hold it, we've studied this. They're actually contributing about $2,200 per capita into the coffers of government. So that framework was put, and then we started to have a discussion, and people started asking questions. And one person got up, I still remember, he was in the back left-hand corner of Robson Square, and he was just horrible, in my mind. That's my inner voice. My inner voice was saying, you are just horrible. Right? And the crowd's outer voice was saying, shut up, you're horrible. Right? And I said, wait, we've already agreed that he's not a racist. So let's try and figure out what it is that's bothering him. And we had a discussion that night, and the entire discussion, the public discussion of that issue, changed dramatically. We had people at the end of the meeting saying, we're lucky these people are coming, we're excited by the diversity that's here, we should do it, and then there's applause. And the media's there, right? It's open, it's not like we're not doing it quietly. And instead of all that stuff, these people started to see that there were benefits. And if you don't talk about the benefits, I was in London from 2011 to 2016. I seldom heard anyone from Europe or the United Kingdom talk about the benefit of a united Europe. It was always quiet. It was always, it's kind of good. They'll never do it. They'll never do it. No, they won't do it. So you don't hear. That's another, I guess that's willful deafness. But you have to, so I think part of what we have to learn is we have to move away from what I call the politics of expedience and excuses to the politics of principle and purpose. So principle is, this is what we believe in. And if you agree, I need your vote. And if you disagree, which you don't hear very often from people, please don't vote for me because I'm going to do this. That's the principle and purpose part. And then you have to know where you're trying to go. So I think that I can remember there was a big speech done at the British Museum by Prime Minister Cameron. And the first question after the speech was, if all of the consequences of voting for Brexit are as dire as you say, why did you call the referendum? And the second question, it was a speech where he announced that anyone that was talking about Brexit were reckless and irresponsible. And the second question from the media was, Prime Minister, how do you feel about having reckless and irresponsible people in your cabinet? No answer. So I think there's always going to be people that say blah, 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 whatever it is. And in this age of misinformation, because we have tons of misinformation, it's even more important that we stand up for what we believe in. So if you're going to create policy, you better have cornerstones of policy that you can stand on. You have a foundation of policy that you stand on and you're comfortable with. And you should know that some people are going to try and erode your foundation or knock out the cornerstone. And just, you've got to stand for it. So it's one of the things I always admired about Preston. He stood and he spoke for what he believed in. You can agree or disagree with him, and Preston's never been someone that says everyone's got to, well, not that I've heard. He's never been someone that says you have to agree with everything I say. You have to engage people in the discussion, and then the public becomes part of the solution. There are no problems we face that we don't need the public to be part of the solution with. So that's a really critical thing for us to understand. Our public life defines us. What I do privately in my private life, that's fine, that's me. But what we do publicly actually defines us as a nation, as a province, as a city, the UK and the United Kingdom. Those are things that are important. So stand for the things you believe in. And if you don't, I think it was Bonhoeffer who once said, they came for the so-and-sos and they're I don't remember what the quote is, but if they come for everyone else and you don't say anything, guess what? When they come for you, there's no one. So you stand up and you fight for it, you believe in it, and you stick with it all the time. And it changes the public discussion. Whether it changes results or not, I don't know. But I'll tell you this. I found talking with people, not labeling people. I notice that there's a book that's being done right now about me, and there's a whole bunch of labels that I have that people think I'm not supposed to care about the environment. I've always cared about the environment. I cared about it when I was mayor. I did stuff with Moura when I was mayor because I was thinking about the environment. I was thinking about water. So you have to think about how you put those things out, but the first thing you have to do is engage people. And it is amazing how hungry they are for information, this real information. And what we should be aware of is the misinformation that's out there is more powerful, it's emotive, and it has no obligations to the fact. I mean, it's effectively what we've seen from some of the political leadership in the United States. So I don't care about any of that. This is what I think. I mean, imagine what they'd been like in the 1400s if they'd said, I don't care that you think the earth is round, it's flat, and I'm not going anywhere. I mean, there's Aboriginal people here that think that would have been a good solution, but it's, not much. There's not much else that you can do with that. So I think the gift of democracy and the gift of an open democracy is the gift of conversation. It's the gift of dialogue. It's the gift of debate. It's the gift of then making a decision on the basis of all of that. And you never get to unanimity, but at least the people who disagree know why you got where you're there. And you build a sort of framework of principle that you can move forward on.
I was very enlightened by your speech. I thought you were a wonderful speaker.
Thank you. Could you say that a little louder, please?
A wonderful speaker. And I thought whatever he said actually was very correct and very true. He did say that don't just talk about it, you have to do it.
Right.
And if you don't do it, you're just there. But one thing you said that actually stuck a chord, and that is, you said you need to set the policy, let the people hear it, and then follow it.
Right.
And the thing that came to mind was the auto industry.
Mm-hmm.
The policy was set, say you want to reduce your carbon emissions and all those other things in all those years.
Right.
And every country has their automakers, and they are trying to create cars to have such standards to go to it, and others are doing the electric cars.
Right.
Volkswagen. Lately, the biggest car company in the world, and then it was caught by having software that corrected the emissions. Is at the time when you are testing the emissions. Mm-hmm. It's not just Volkswagen. Audi. I hear that lots of other companies, from Mitsubishi, Fuji, everything else is doing it. I guess one thing I'm saying is that it's one thing that we set the standards, we think that we set the standards, the companies are following and so forth. Sometimes there are going to be other Mickey Mouses that are there.
Right.
And we should be watching out for that.
I agree.
Before that happens. The other thing that came to mind is you are so creative. The one factor in the world right now is Donald Trump. He literally turned around the support for climate change or climate policy and said he's against it. I wonder what you could do to sway him the other way, the Canadian.
To sway him? Well, let me start by talking about the auto companies for a minute. You're right. When we set standards, we have to live up to the standards. We have to check the standards. One of the things that I think that happens, though, is we often think, well, we'll just do more rules and that'll solve the problem. You don't solve the problem like that. You can't solve the problem just with more rules. You have to follow the requirements that you've got. You've got to check them up. And then when you find someone that's breached them, there has to be serious consequences for them. So I'd say that's important. In terms of climate change, let me take you back for me. I can recall in 2006, I think it was about December 2006, and we had climate strategy that we wanted to do in British Columbia, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had climate strategy he wanted to follow in California. And both of us felt like the central governments, whether it was Washington, D.C. or Ottawa, were not that enthusiastic about it. In fact, they were the opposite of enthusiastic about it, I would say, right? But the key that I liked about what we had in Ottawa was they said, if you want to do that in British Columbia, go ahead and do it. So they didn't stop us from trying to do what we were trying to do. And Schwarzenegger and I had the conversation, and we decided, why don't we try and get together between British Columbia and California? And from our perspective, frankly, that was a really good idea because California's got 33 million people. We had 4. And, frankly, 4 million from British Columbia wouldn't have the kind of impact that 37 million, particularly when it's California. So we agreed that what we try and do is we would lead from the West. We get used to sort of having people from Ottawa say, well, we'll tell you what to do. Or we will, I'm sure in Washington, well, they'll tell you what to do. We can lead from the West, but you have to lead. So we agreed we'd do it, and he had already launched what he called the Western Climate Initiative. And I can remember joking with him, I think it was March or sometime he came the next year into Vancouver. I remember joking with him, wouldn't it be great if we could get other provinces from different parts of the country to become part of the Western Climate Initiative? And sure enough, Quebec is part of the Western Climate Initiative. Ontario is part of the Western Climate Initiative. Manitoba is part of the Western Climate Initiative. I never really thought of them as Western before, but I'm glad for them to follow our lead if they'd like to follow our lead, right? And he did the same thing in the United States. And so we built stuff. I think if you wait for Donald Trump to get it right, you're going to have a long wait. A long wait, right? So I think you recognize that as a big problem. How do you make progress outside of that framework? That's a problem, no question about it. But here's the other thing about it. It goes, but for me at least, it goes to deciding you're going to do something about it. Canada can do stuff about it. We should, I believe, right? I think a lot of the things that we allow people to say is because they're afraid of change. There's a lot of states in the United States that are trying to do stuff on climate change. There are lots of cities that are trying to do stuff on climate change. But here's the thing that I find aggravating. We have Vancouver saying, we want to be the greenest city in the world. Political leadership, want to be the greenest city in the world. Except we don't want to tell you that we're going to invest in transit. We'll ask you if you want to do transit. You can't be the greenest city in the world if you don't have a vision for transit and how you deliver it. That's just, that's hollow to say that. So I think what we have is we have to get people to say, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to try and do it. And you can do lots locally. We could change the way Vancouver, we can listen to that word, change. People get nervous about change. And they have all the old solutions. They say, well, we can't do all those old solutions anymore. I mean, we don't even want to take them on. Well, we have to change. We have to change in terms of our environmental policy. We have to change in terms of how we design our cities. We have to change in terms of how we deal with our transportation initiatives. We should be changing in terms of how we deal with our health initiatives. One of the things about Yaletown in downtown, so people said to me when we went to rezone that as a residential neighborhood, right? People said, the business community actually said, well, it'll never happen. I said, we tell people we want them to walk to work. You have to create an opportunity for them to walk to work. So we did it. 62% of all trips in downtown Vancouver now are walking, people walking to work. Pretty good neighborhood. People kind of like it. But if you don't give them the choice, they don't get it. So changing the way we design our cities would have a huge impact on climate change. Huge impact. The nice thing about walking to work is it actually has a huge impact on our healthcare budgets. Because all you need is about 30 minutes a day of physical activity. You reduce the incidence of type 2 diabetes by 90%. You reduce the incidence of cancer by about 50%. Those are big pluses. I'm going to build a sidewalk. It's nothing compared to building a transit system. It's like physical fitness, like the people that buy physical fitness machines. I'm going to get a Bowflex. I'm going to get it pumped. And the Bowflex goes and it stands over in the corner of my basement, and I keep looking at it, and it's not doing anything for me. I'm still the same guy. So we have to do things ourselves, and I think that's how we have to deal with Mr. Trump and whatever his administration is doing. We have to do it ourselves. Work with them when we can. Do it on our own when we have to. Right? Lead. The definition of leadership for me is someone who's doing something first, not someone who's doing what everyone else has done before. And other people define leadership, not you. So you guys are all in a position where you can, where I hope you will, because frankly, we need you to.
You have time for one more question.
Go ahead. I want that jacket next, okay?
I really want to let you know that your speech was really, really inspiring. So I'm in the MPPJ program in my second year.
Yeah.
I'm from San Francisco, and I kind of related to what you said when you were back in the States doing your college degree in New Hampshire, and right now what's going back home is kind of different, and so I kind of see back home in a different lens with the Canadian perspective. But my question is, with the emergence of the post-truth era with the election of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
How do you think...
Did you have to use a mic when you said that?
Yeah. So in a public policy school like our new school, and it's kind of scary to think that changing the world, making change would be much more difficult now if everything is based on a fact-free, truth-free scenario. And how do you think we can avoid that to make sure that our policies are guided by facts and truth?
Well, the person that has to make sure your policies are divided by facts and truth is you. Right? That's the first thing. You have an obligation. If you want people to give you respect for what you do, you better have fact and policy, because the other stuff is ephemeral. It'll go, right? The second thing I think about dealing with the world today, it's one of the things you find when you talk to CNN. They'll always say, as the leader of the this, as the leader of that for the United States. Remember, that's an American channel saying that. There's a whole bunch of leadership that's taking place in Europe. There's a bunch of leadership that's taking place in Africa. There's a bunch of leadership that's taking place in Asia. And we have to recognize that, some of them are actually giving us lessons that we can learn. And we should know that. We shouldn't undermine the principles that we have, and you should fight for them. Right? So, the maximum amount of time that Donald Trump is going to be left there is 7.5 years. That's a maximum, right? 7.5. Well, I'm not making any political comments here. It's part of my diplomatic training. 7.5 years, right? So a lot of things happen in 7.5 years in different parts of the world than the United States. How many times do you really think about what's happening in South America? Really. We think about the Pacific. We think about the Asia Pacific. We think about China and Korea and Japan and India. We don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the Maldives. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in Bolivia or Uruguay. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about what's taking place in a place like, probably even Nigeria, which is a huge, huge country in Africa that will have huge impacts on the future of the world. So we have to, I think, no one of us can embrace everything, right? But we can take our chunk, whatever particular chunk that you're interested in, whether it's back in your community, whether it's in this community, whether it's in another community, and be the sort of the beacon. And sometimes you'll have cloudy days and miserable times, you'll have people attacking you, and you just have to keep at it, right? It's easier. It's a good example of something that's easier to say than to do. But if you believe in what you're doing, if you believe that the things you're doing help other people, which is what public policy is about, it's about other people, it's not about you, helps other people, then you have to commit to it. You have to be there for it. I can tell, in 1996, you weren't here probably, but in 1996 I lost an election. And a lot of people said, you should give up, you should, you're never going to be elected, you should forget it, right? I wasn't running because it was going to be easy. So I said, okay, I've got a job to do here. I'm going to go out here, I'm going to work at it. I still believe in these things. I'm still going to try and pursue these things. I can look back now and say, I made a difference here. We made a difference here. We made a little difference there. Did we solve all the problems? Clearly not. But we made progress. And that's what we have to be willing to recognize. And I think for all of us, as we look at the world we live in today, we have to put this hat on. The world has changed. It's not the world I grew up in 1960. It's not the world I grew up in 1980. It's not even the world we grew up in 1990. It's changed dramatically. For 5 years I was in London. We had a Scottish referendum that failed. We had a Brexit referendum that was successful. We had all sorts of changes that took place. It's not the same. This is a big, 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 frightening word. And one of the things that's frightening about it, I can't tell you how much the world is going to change 5 years from now. I can tell you this. If you want to be a change maker, you have to be a leader. You have to lead. You have to commit to the principles and the purpose that you believe in, the value framework that you believe in, and recognize there's a whole bunch of people out there that don't. I'll tell you one last story and then I'll sit down. I'm on the board of the Commonwealth. The first place in my life that I ever heard that someone's tired of hearing about human rights was from a member of the board of the Commonwealth. How can you be a member of the board of the Commonwealth and not believe in human rights? Elimination of child and early forced marriage, providing opportunities for young people around the world to do things and giving them the education they need, giving them the health, the water that they need to drink. All of those things. You can't be a member of the Commonwealth and say, but I don't care about human rights. The Commonwealth is about human rights. It's about freeing people to do the things that they want to do and follow their dreams, right? So you've got to know you're going to be surprised by where you hear the bad stuff, but you know what? You're strong enough to do the good stuff. And if you commit to it, you'll be amazed how far you get. Thank you guys all very much. Good luck. Have a great time.
So we thought it might be appropriate for our Vice President of External Relations, Philip Steenkamp, to thank Mr. Premier.
Well, that was an absolute delight, and I'm reminded by how much fun we had, Moura and I had when we were working for you, mostly. I was challenged a little bit today, I think, as you were, Moura, about what to call Mr. Campbell. I mean, we could call him Your Worship, we could call him Premier, we could call him High Commissioner, probably Your Excellency if we wanted to. But I think the title he deserves today is Changemaker Extraordinaire. Thank you. And I just reflect on a few areas, Gordon, where you made such a significant change in this province. I think about the remarkable transformation in the relationship with First Nations, something I was very proud to be a part of as well. And we have First Nation leaders here, so honored to have them here today. I think about your global leadership in climate change, which was extraordinary. And I think, sitting here at UBC, I think about your transformative investments in education, and particularly in post-secondary education. And the evidence of that is all around us. And I know that you did this as part of a team, but it was your leadership ultimately. And I was reflecting, too, on a few lessons I learned working for you. Moura spoke about our terror of your return from holiday after you had read all of those books. And I remember one year I actually slipped you a novel because I hoped you would read the novel instead of the public policy books. But I'm thinking about the lessons. The importance of creativity. That has really stuck with me. The importance of that very vigorous exchange of ideas. The importance about establishing a vision. Absolutely critical. The importance of leadership and accountability. And I recall being in cabinet meetings with colleagues, and we would have presented something to you and to cabinet, and you would say, well, who's accountable for this? And we'd all look at each other this way. And that lesson was somebody has to be accountable. Somebody has to take the lead, even if you're working as part of a team. The importance of being decisive as well. I recall you saying to us that the best answer always was yes, of course. But the second best answer was no. The worst answer was maybe. You have to tell people. And the importance of focus. Moura will recall this, but you'd go into the cabinet chamber and there'd be a big poster on the wall there with the goals of the government laid out. So this relentless focus on the goals you've established and this relentless focus on implementation. So it's a great honor to have heard you again today. It's a delight, in fact. Really want to thank you. Thank you on behalf of the school, but also thank you on behalf of UBC, and thank you on behalf of the audience. And we have a small gift for you. So thank you very much.
Okay, don't worry, it's time for a break. Whew. But before I let you go, I just wanted to mention that we have a lobby gallery at the Lew Institute and now the Policy School. We have a show that's in the progress of being installed, so it's not quite finished yet. It's the work of a well-known documentary filmmaker and photographer by the name of Mimi Shakarova. For those interested, there's going to be an event and a public screening of her acclaimed documentary, The Price of Sex, here Friday, October 13th. We have our colleague from the Global Reporting Center, Peter Klein, to thank for connecting our Lou scholar, Blake Smith, who is our lobby gallery coordinator, for this kind of connection. And I think it's an important example of our efforts to find different ways to explore global policy issues and in new formats for research communication. So enjoy your break. Don't be intimidated by Sam's capacity to draw. We invite you to write notes and add to the Post-its are floating around. I think Carrie's got them. Yeah, she's waving at me. Anyway, enjoy the break, and we'll be back here at, let's see, oh, is that clock correct? That clock is correct. So should I, beg pardon? 10:45. So what else to do? So welcome back. Welcome back. Incredible. Welcome back. So we want to encourage you to visit our new Policy School website, policyschool.ubc.ca, which is a landing page of key content. Whew, thank you. A full website will follow next year, but we just wanted to get something out there into the internet sphere, whatever it's called. And please follow us at our new Twitter account at UBC Policy School. So for any updates on the MPPGA program, we have a fantastic newsletter, so you can subscribe to that monthly newsletter. You'll find the subscribe link on our website, mppga.ubc.ca, or you can sign up here. And remember, if you have nephews, nieces, cousins, our applications for next fall will open in early October. So the best word of mouth is some of the best marketing we can do. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to a panel of distinguished speakers. They're at the front here, who are going to tackle the question, how should the policy school of the future think, research, teach, and act? So we're pleased to welcome Timothy Sargent, Deputy Minister for International Trade, Global Affairs Canada, as well as our Deputy Champion for UBC. Thank you, Tim. And we also welcome, next to Tim, John MacArthur, Senior Fellow with the Brookings Institution and a Senior Advisor with the UN Foundation, and, even better, a UBC alum. John. As is Tim, by the way, forgot to mention that. I'm not sure if you're allowed to be a deputy champion if you aren't an alum. I'm not sure. Anyway, we're glad you are. And then Kim Baird, who you've already met via Mr. Premier's speech. Kim is also with us. She's the former elected chief of the Tsawwassen First Nation and owner of a strategic consulting company. And last but not least, Professor Candace Callison, who is an associate professor in our School of Journalism and has kindly agreed to moderate the panel. So we've reserved time at the end for questions from the audience, but over to you, Candace.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be over here at the Lou. I generally teach right across the street, and this morning we were talking about journalism in the Trump era. So these are interesting times we live in. And as I said to students last week, and even to my own kids who were starting new schools, you don't get to be the new kid very often, so enjoy it. And this is that moment for the policy school, right? You guys are the new kid. You get to think about what the policy school of the future should be doing, should be thinking about, should be talking about, should be fostering public discourse about. So it's really exciting to have this panel today, and I'm going to give each of the panelists about 10 to 12 minutes to give us a talk about what they think the Policy School of the Future should be doing. And then we'll open it up for 30 minutes of Q&A. So keep your questions handy, and we'll hopefully get a good discussion going at the end. First, Tim Sargent.
Okay. Thank you very much. Certainly a great pleasure to be back here at UBC, and I've watched the genesis of this idea grow, seen this idea grow to reality. It's very exciting. And I really think that there is a real role for public policy schools generally, and for this particular public policy school at this particular time. So I'm happy to offer a few thoughts and suggestions about how to take this forward, but I think in many cases these are the directions that you're going in. I think the first thing is the importance of the interdisciplinary aspect of policy schools in general, and this policy school in particular. Certainly somebody who was maybe not born but raised as an economist. I did my PhD in economics here at UBC. I worked for the federal government as an economist, not just as an economist, but as a Department of Finance economist, which is sort of the purest form of the breed, I would say, in Ottawa. And certainly when I was doing my studies, actually less so at UBC, but oddly enough, but certainly at some of the previous universities, economics was viewed very much as apart from other social science. In fact, economists view themselves as being the only real social scientists, and the others were kind of like history or something like that, but they weren't really scientists at all. And that, the economists, there were sort of the economists and the physicists kind of over here, and then all the kind of other lesser things over there. And a lot of it was about showing off how much mathematics you knew, and and very kind of intricate models. So it's very much kind of about showing off your mathematical ability. Maybe it was a coincidence that most people were men at that time. I don't know. But it was very disconnected. And I think economists as a discipline has come a long way. And I think the global financial crisis was a very good example of economists not knowing as much about the world as they thought that they did. And I think my profession has learned a little bit of humility, at least for now, from that episode. And so I think we all of us, economists or not now, understand the importance of having a cross-cutting, interdisciplinary view of problems. When I think about my own world of international trade, the reality is you can explain people, you can draw people diagrams about why trade makes everybody better off and why we should have freer trade. But at the end of the day, you can't link together the political aspects, and you can't understand in a little bit more in more detail who, yes, of course, the economy as a whole can win, but there will be losers. Who are those losers? How do you deal with those losers? We're just not going to get the kind of free trade deals that we would like to see as economists, and we know that would benefit society overall. So you've got to understand these linkages between economics and politics, between economics and psychology. And I think of my own Department of Global Affairs, we have, there's a good example of trying to join up thinking about trade, thinking about development, thinking about the foreign affairs or the political side. And all of these things become important. And understanding the perspectives of the different parts of the department as to how we approach a problem is very important. I mean, as we think about doing trade deals, especially with developing countries, we have to think about what development assistance is required and how we weave these things together, because it's no good having a trade agreement with a country that doesn't have good infrastructure, for instance. So you need to think about how you develop the infrastructure. So I very much applaud the kind of the cross-cutting focus that a policy school can bring to problems. And it's very easy to come up with examples in the modern world of areas where you really need to have people from a variety of disciplines. I think the next thing I think that a policy school needs to do, a good policy school will do, is it's very important to be connected. Connected, of course, I think connected to other countries, to understand what's going on in other countries. Other countries often, especially in the policy sphere, we have a tendency to not look enough to the experiences of other countries. was talking to someone today about New Zealand, for instance, and how they're working with indigenous groups there, with the Maori, in order to get them to increase their capacity to export, for instance, and to take Aboriginal businesses there to the next level. Learning from those kinds of experiences is really, really important. Canada's not an island, and yes, of course, we're a different country, we have a different reality, but we're not so different. It's easy to go around the world and find some parallels. So I think being connected to what's happening in other countries, so that we in the policy world can learn from their experiences, not necessarily repeat exactly, but learn from them, as well as to be letting people around the world know about what we do in Canada as well, because all of these linkages need to go both ways. I think connectedness is also very important in how you be relevant to government, to policymakers, which is not to say that the policy school is simply there to serve government. That's, of course, you're about much more than that. But I do think that there is an appetite in government for policy, for good policy. I think we feel that the debate in Canada is perhaps not rich as it could be, as rich as it could be. Very much welcome, a louder voice on a lot of issues. And so how do you get relevant? A lot of that is by connecting to government, to policymakers, but not just people within government, with journalists, with civil society groups, Indigenous peoples. Just my advice would be to try and get out there in the world and talk to kind of real people with real problems, and be part of that debate wherever that debate is happening. Of course, it's having spent enough time in academia to understand the importance of publishing and academic journals, and it's not to devalue that. But when I think of what broader society gets out of the universities, it's the question is, how can you disseminate that? How can you make that relevant to ordinary people, and how do you become part of that policy debate, and how do you foster that policy debate? Another piece of advice I would have, probably close with this, is it's very important for a policy school in particular, but probably in life in general. Focus on your strengths and where you have opportunities. It's very easy to want to do everything, and of course the universities, in some ways, that's part of the ethos. I don't necessarily quarrel with that, but when I think of the policy school here, you come with some very big strengths, and I think it'd be great to build on those strengths. Obviously the Asia focus, and obviously you're geographically well placed to be a very important and influential voice in those conversations. I think about the issues that connect Indigenous people, resource development, the environment, and democracy. And of course, we think about these issues a lot here, but in a lot of the Asia-Pacific region as well, those are very, very real issues. You go to Myanmar, you go to Papua New Guinea, Australia. These are all relevant, and I think the school can play a really big role there. As I say, bringing the Canadian experience to the world and learning from other people's experience. And then I guess the final thing is, and again, I don't think that this policy school will be susceptible to this disease, but research is important, but teaching is important. And having come through the system, having been to a few universities, there's a big difference between a university that thinks of its students as important and really tries to develop them, and those that just see them essentially as a way to pay the bills and sort of an inconvenient abstraction to get through so you can actually get back to your office and do some real work. But I know from my interactions with people here that you're very student-focused, and I think that that's really, really important. So I'm going to stop there.
Great. Thank you so much. John Parker?
Thank you, and it's such a pleasure to be here. But first, I just want to acknowledge Tim. For those who don't know, Tim has this big file called NAFTA happening right now as Deputy Minister, so it's a tribute to his commitment and a tribute to the importance of today that you're here. So I think we're all honored that you're here, knowing how much is on your shoulders. So very sincerely, thank you, Tim. And it's a credit to the institution. That said, I thought I would just share three P's of thoughts today: personal, policy, and program. And let me start with a personal. I was thinking this morning on my way over here, flying in from Washington, D.C. late last night. Some call it the new Sin City. Others can debate. But of how actually just very personally meaningful it is for me to come here today. I first came to this campus in 1979, the fall of 1979, when my mother, who happens to be here, joined the Faculty of Medicine and moved us out west from Toronto. And that was the first time I came to really experience this institution, and it's been very much part of my life ever since then. She went to UBC, my father went to UBC, my sister went to UBC. This is a place that I think we care about a lot, and it's kind of part of the fabric of our own lives. But then I came to UBC, and in 1996, I graduated from UBC, and I had a summer job, thanks to the then Vice President of External Affairs, Peter Ufford, working in his office. And my major project that summer was to help work with the launch of the Liu Institute, and I was there for the groundbreaking with Dr. J.J. Liu for the new institute, and was there to plant the tree and saw what a momentous occasion that was for the institution. And since then, I've stayed in active touch for the past, I guess, 19 years, which is funny because I'm 29. But and I really think that for those of you who know him, somewhere Mark Zacher is smiling. Mark Zacher was a legendary professor of international relations here who connected many of his students across the university and across generations to support practice. One of them, who is a colleague of Tim's, Paul Sampson, is here today, who's now a senior official in the Ministry of Finance as well. Paul and I met in 1997 when we were both, he was a postdoc, I was a graduate student at the Kennedy School, and Mark said, you guys should meet each other. And we've been friends ever since. And this is part of the community that has built over time, and I've had countless conversations with Brian Jobe, Moura in the past few years, people like Yves Tabergien and Taylor Owen and others, and seeing this come together, I know how much work it is, and I want to congratulate Dean Averill too, because having spent enough time in universities, it's a lot of work to get to a day like today. I also, with that as personal context, want to just reflect for a moment on what I consider perhaps, if I can be so bold, since boldness is celebrated, according to former Premier Campbell, the three core challenges I see us facing in the world today. I've had the privilege to work as an economist, but as I half-jokingly say, my academic friends think I'm an activist, and my activist friends think I'm an academic, and somewhere between those two is true. But I've had the privilege to work with leaders in global health, leaders in food security, leaders in energy, climate, and so forth, internationally, domestically, in many corners of the world. And I've, like many of us, lived through the earth-shaking movements of the past couple of years. And I think that the perspectives on the world differ dramatically based on how you see the world. Some people think the world is in an amazing place today, and that the surveys of world opinion show that, but many parts of the world feel like it's not, including this one. And I think there are three key problems that we're all trying to solve. The first is to recouple economic progress with social progress. When I was going to graduate school, it was kind of a given. Everything correlates with GDP per capita. So really you want to just get the growth going, and the rest will over time get there. That was the norm. I would say we're now at a stage where it's the opposite. So the economy grows. Who cares? What does it mean for me? Most people have very little faith that the big picture doing well is good for them. And the economy needs to be about shared economic gains and shared prosperity, however that's defined, not concentrated prosperity. So recoupling the economy with social progress is the first challenge. The second is decoupling the economy with what it's doing to the planet. So every new unit of economic progress still today is cranking out one corresponding unit of environmental problem. And we haven't figured out yet how to decouple those trends adequately. That we see it most prominently on the debates on climate. We want the world to get better standards of living. The corollary, though, is that better standards of living is destroying the planet.
It's a flip side of success. We need to decouple those. But we also see it in the oceans. We see it in our lakes and rivers. We see it in the soil nutrients. We see it in the outflows of fertilizers going into the ocean in order to feed enough population. We have eutrophication around the world. We have biodiversity crises. We have many, many problems where our economic progress is causing environmental problem, to put it mildly. But the third big problem that we're trying to solve, and I would argue that each society is grappling with some variant of these three things. The third problem is to leave no one behind. We are grappling in every corner of the world with communities and populations that have been left behind or feel left behind. That takes different shapes in different places. Far be it from me to explain what that means in this place. I grew up in the Musqueam area when I was brought out here, and I was never taught about the history of the land I grew up on until much, much later, and I still feel like I need to learn it vastly better. This is a situation where in some places it's LGBTQ rights, in others it's the Rohingya, in others it's issues of faith. And in the United States, I would argue that what we saw with the presidential election, some people say that the presidential election was cause of many of the problems. I see it as symptom. And we have to understand how disconnected so many people feel from what's happening in their society because they feel they've been left behind. Now, fortunately, I'm going to crib from former Premier Campbell. Premier Campbell, that's a lifelong title, I guess. Excuse me, Premier Campbell. You have to know where you're going in order to know what to do. Fortunately, for these three big problems, the world had a pretty big conversation, the most inclusive global policy conversation it's ever had, a few years ago. And it took a few years, millions of people involved. And they came up with something called the Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that set the agenda. We're used to thinking about goals being for places over there. The reality is they're just as much for here. I'm just finishing a little study of Canada's domestic status on the Sustainable Development Goals. Sneak preview. Canada's not wholly on track, by my estimation, for any of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because we're close, but we're not doing enough. And on pretty much every issue you can imagine, there's someone being left behind, or there's some issue being left behind. Now, the downside is it's hard. A good side is we've got an agreement on where to go, but the flip side is we haven't talked enough about how to get there. And that's why I think a policy school like this is so important. These arguments will be arguments. They need to be arguments. This will require connectivity inward and outward. The sources of innovation and green finance, if you talk to the world leaders on this, are coming from the emerging economies. They're not coming from the advanced economies that are stuck in their ways. We need to work with them to understand the technological frontier of green finance, something that this province has helped to pioneer. But we also need to have these networks of human connectivity that are the essence of solving problems. It is literally people who look different, who act different, who think different, who feel different, working together that will solve these problems. So that's where I'll finish with the P of this program. We are in a time where I would only agree with so many of the comments that have been said about the frontiers moving so fast. I think the role of a policy school is twofold ultimately. One, it's to support the development of managers of complexity, because it's complex. You need to manage science, you need to manage policy, you need to manage people, you need to manage action, you need to manage institutions. But it's also about the research and the applied engagement of the faculty. And this, I would argue, and I have elsewhere, is a place where Canada needs to keep raising its game. And I would argue this is part of how Canada contributes to the world. We're a certain share of the world economy, but we have the capacity to be a very large share of the world's ideas. And ideas matter. There are new ideas that are needed, there's new actions that are needed, but there's new approaches that are needed to bring them to reality. One of the things that we're working on right now, and Tim knows a bit about this, is a study group which President Santaono is part of. We're going to be putting out a report in the next couple of weeks on how to even engage globally our students with the world across this country as normal, while also making sure that we're engaged locally with solving the same problems. This is the future that we all live in. So on that note, it's for personal, policy, and programmatic reasons that I'm so thrilled to be here today. I'm thrilled to be with this incredible panel, and I just want to congratulate you, and more than anything, as was said earlier, the students for leading us on this journey. So thank you, everyone.
It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Elder Larry Grant for welcoming us to Musqueam territory, and he even let me take a selfie with him, so I'm very pleased about that. I'd like to thank Moura for inviting me today, although I wonder about her wording about provocative presenters, so I hope I don't disappoint. I've grudgingly come to accept that I'm a policy wonk at heart, so I'm really pleased to participate today. It's awesome to see Gordon Campbell, who in my opinion was the first true non-Indigenous champion of Indigenous issues in a real way in this province. It's a biased opinion, of course, as well. We've been asked to speak about our views about the public policy school of the future and how it should think, research, teach, and act. And I'm going to keep my remarks really brief because I'm more interested in the dialogue to follow. But overall, it's quite simple in my mind. I think it should ensure there's a strong focus on one of the greatest public policy challenges our province and country faces right now. And I think that's reconciliation of First Nations rights and title with provincial and federal crowns. But reconciliation for me goes beyond mere legal rights. We need to ensure that Indigenous peoples enjoy the same rights and privileges Canadians not only enjoy but often take for granted. First Nations are overrepresented in every major poor or negative socioeconomic statistic you can imagine. When I think of reconciliation, it is more than aspects of residential school settlements and the outcomes of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its awesome report that's shone a light on some of the dark past of this country. But I also think we need to restore legal, political, environmental, land, resource, jurisdictional, and economic rights to Indigenous communities. And it's crazy to think how many decisions get made for Indigenous people every day by provincial, federal, or municipal governments, from the justice system to education, child welfare, and health until recently we're seeing the formation of the First Nation Health Authority. But the public service is making, and politicians make, major policy decisions that impact Indigenous people constantly with very little input, if any, from Indigenous people. And consider also that little has been taught in school at any level about the reasons why First Nations are stuck in cycles of poverty or the multi-generational trauma impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples. And we're still using the same government apparatus in many cases that regale First Nations into unsustainable situations. And it feels like this country is stuck, that everyone is stuck. Well, except for my community. We seem to be in the early days of breaking these chains, to which we're seeing evidence of this now through the development of our lands. So public policy practitioners need to know this is the issue of our time. They need to know why this is the issue of our time. And as far as research, these issues could use much research on how to decrease the gaps in all the jurisdictional areas First Nations people are left behind in. What are the causes for these conditions? What are the barriers for overcoming them? And are there success stories in any jurisdiction we can learn from? I think a public policy school of the future would work with Indigenous communities to identify important research on these topics. Research like the Harvard Project's review of U.S. tribes and its findings found that strong governance led to strong communities, and that's helped many First Nations have a deeper understanding on some of the structural barriers we need to replace to advance our communities. Research like this, as an example, in Canada would be extremely helpful. And if public policy practitioners at any level, a teacher, a politician, or a public servant, are compelled to act on these matters and try to make a difference and move the needle on reconciliation and poor socioeconomic conditions of Indigenous peoples, I think this is an important goal, and I think we should seriously consider ways of helping Indigenous communities develop policymaking capacity, to examine different models of Indigenous governance, and to give Indigenous people these sorts of tools to assist their communities. When I was chief at Tawasin and negotiated our treaty, the treaty represented our external reconciliation with governments, but the 23 laws that we passed on the effective day represented the culmination of our internal reconciliation. We had 15 months to do 43 projects, one of which was the implementation of 23 laws, integrating into the regional governance system, GVRD, Metro Vancouver, forming a new governance structure, and making it operational. 43 projects like that. It was change like we've never experienced since European contact. And we were able to do this because we had policymaking capacity. And one of the legacies of our new governance structure is that we have this as institutional capacity now, with public policy-related positions assisting our lawmaking and policy development processes in our community. And we've hired many public policy students to assist us over the time, though sadly not from this institution. One grad student helped us draft our constitution. So I think it shows the practical application of these ideas can make real change and make a real difference in Indigenous communities. But I'll close by saying that the bottom line is that we all know the sort of shameful poverty in Canada, and we can't unknow that anymore. And more people are finally discovering the shameful past of this country. And I think it's time that we all try to do something about it. And I think institutions like UBC can provide great capacity for examining these issues and enabling solutions for Indigenous communities. So those are my thoughts, and I look forward to the discussion. Hi, Chika.
So thanks, Kim, and thanks to all of you. It's a really provocative set of comments that I have the great challenge of trying to tie together and then throw it to you for questions. But, you know, when you think about what connects a lot of what our speakers have said, right, it's this desire to make things better. And this is the challenge for a policy school, right? How do you both make things better whilst also giving the tools, giving the professional practice? And so just thinking about what ties these things together, I wonder if all of you would like to respond a little bit to each other, because I think, you know, this notion that we can't unknow what we know now about our history, about the shameful poverty, about the statistics that, you know, create an enormous challenge. We can't also then you know, necessarily decouple social progress with environmental impact, right? So, I mean, I think there's a bunch of things that we could talk about around, in John's words, not leaving anyone behind. So I wonder if you guys would like to respond to each other first and talk about how Canada might meet its sustainability goals, and or how the policy school might train up leaders that are committed to not leaving anyone behind, to addressing the kind of things that Kim has raised and that John has raised, and, you know, this question of how do we make things better, right, which Tim started off with.
Okay, well, I think we're starting with the easy questions. I'll come back to a couple of things. Firstly, It's very easy with some of these problems to kind of, just kind of sit in your office and theorize about it and sort of read secondary or tertiary literature on it. It's another thing to actually go there and experience the problems. And I would say, from my very, very limited experience in visiting, reserves and in the north, it's not just that you're physically there, you actually get to see it and you don't see a photo. It's much more important to actually be talking to the people in situ, and not necessarily the people that you would talk to, the people who come to you and talk to you on an issue, but the people actually in the community, and to get that kind of diversity of view. And also, what does the world look like from where they sit? And that could be a very different set of issues, and they could be viewing the problems quite differently. So I think that's really important, and I think it's important for people who are working on an issue to really get that. It's not enough just to talk to other scholars. It's not enough to just to talk to people in government. You actually have to talk to the people on the ground, and I think that's really important. And I've certainly, every time I've got out of what's called the Ottawa bubble, I found it enormously rewarding, which is why I try and come on these kinds of events. And then again, I think I would just emphasize something I said earlier. It's not one body of knowledge, it's not one subject area that's going to give you the answers to these things. So, for instance, it's very easy for an economist to come along and say, well, what you need to do is have more commercial activity and more resource activity, and that will, to get to John's point, that will generate more GDP, and that has to be good, right? Like, you've got more GDP, so that has to be good. Well, no, not necessarily. That GDP not much of that can stay in the community, or it could only go to certain people in the community, or the community might not be ready for certain kinds of development that make various kinds of infrastructure that have to be put in place. So, again, you need to have a multidisciplinary and also a multi-policy approach to these things. It's not just one set of policies that's necessarily going to solve the problem.
I guess I think former Premier, his comments about change management were accurate in that really you need to set where you're going, but you also need to engage with the people you want to go with you. And in Tsawwassen, I mean, we took that very seriously. We had 94% of our members, no matter where they resided, participate in the treaty vote. To have that level of engagement took 10 years of hard work to ensure people felt comfortable that they could ratify a 300-page document that changed their legal and constitutionally protected rights forever. So we worked really hard, and we provided all the information we could. And I think, people don't want to be snowed. They want to know the facts. They want to know what's good about things and what's bad about things. And if you do that, people will make reasonable decisions based on information they face. Right now, I think, whether it be climate change or reconciliation, the general population does not have enough information about these topics to be in alignment with making major changes that would impact things to either topic, reconciliation or climate change. So I think there's a lot of work that has to be done to start those discussions and start them where there's safe spaces for people to talk about their opinions without being attacked, and have the opportunity to be informed. And I think just as Canada is diverse with different regions and populations, the First Nations of Canada, Indigenous people of Canada actually are just as diverse and need spaces to explore these dialogues at a macro level and an internal level. And so those are some things I think that could be extremely helpful in starting to ensure that the general public or the constituents of Indigenous communities can not be left behind.
So many thoughts come to mind, so to organize them is not easy for me, but I would say a few things. The first is, and this is so important in my view in a policy school, Ottawa, Victoria, City Hall, they're crucial. But it is not just about Ottawa, Victoria, and City Hall. Often the opposite. Everyone who works in any of those capitals reads every day. They listen to people every day. They hear things every day. They are trying to succeed at the task in front of them every day. And they are hungry for solutions. So if you only cared about government, in a certain sense, in the most constructive sense of the term, you need to be in the face of government, interacting with it to help them succeed. But more than that, in the society we live in today, increasingly, government is what the economists would call price taker, not price maker. So there are a lot of issues, especially global issues, where there are many, many other forms of collaboration. I call it matrix multilateralism. Whether it's the private sector alliances, whether it's the scientific alliances, whether it's the World Economic Forum getting everyone from every sector in the world, whether it's young people's alliances, whether it's social media, whether it's activist alliances. Each of these self-organizes, and it's a matrix because they all do so in their domain. So the epidemiologists don't tend to talk a lot with the ocean activists. They don't. Because just like universities, people go to their department, they get their degree, they learn the signals of what's important from their professors and how they pass their tests. And that element of specialization is crucial for generating knowledge, crucial. It's often not so helpful for solving problems. And this is where I think one needs to be, I would argue, a professional translator. So this is embedded in that notion I called managers of complexity. You need to be a professional translator between disciplines, between sectors, between communities, and you need to know that different people use different words for different reasons. And if you can help them figure out where they're trying to get together, that is central. So a big piece of this, I would argue, is having respect for science, by which I define as a world of testable hypotheses, but also a respect for people and where they live and how they see things and what the truth looks like to them. Those are not at odds. Those need to be reconciled. And I have so many things. The things I've seen in the past few years about people who see one side of that but not the other, it kind of almost defines my day-to-day existence, I feel like. And so the need to bridge those is crucial. Final thing I'll say, the private sector on this stuff is crucial. So the engine of our economy is, roughly speaking, market-driven entrepreneurialism and other forms of business. That is just a point of fact. Many of these questions will be defined by the products, the services, the forms of finance, the supply chains, the workforces, how people are treated at every stage of a product or a service coming to life, whether their rights are respected in their community, whether they feel valued, or whether they feel extracted from as people. These are all part of a crucial piece of this. And I would argue, I've been involved with other colleagues looking at what's the role of business in sustainable development. And there's a global conversation taking shape around this, and Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever, is kind of the most famous visionary of this right now. But there are many working on this in different places. One of the most interesting things I think about this in the Canadian context is Michael Bloomberg has led this effort on so-called Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. How does each industry measure quality on being a good company? If you are in Canada, that means the BC securities regulator is the one governing public companies from this country, this province, and how they go out into the world. And I would argue that we haven't probably had a conversation on how what the world needs is measured by what companies are reporting on in this province and every other province. That sounds like a big, far-off challenge, and it is. But in my view, if we talk about all these other problems without talking about that problem, we end up in a very similar trap. And so we need to go through each of these systematically and allow each person to succeed in the milieu where they live.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. So it's up to you now. This is your moment to ask that question you've been sitting on for the last 20 minutes. And I'm actually going to stand up. This is probably easier. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is for Timothy Sargent, but for me to the rest of the panel, of course. Oh, thank you. So actually, I've seen one of your talks, Mr. Sargent, at the International Economic Forum of the Americas in Montreal this summer, where you talked about the recent treaty between, agreement between Canada and Europe, and how it was a next step towards some sort of revision of world treaties, in the sense that it kind of addressed some of the issues with the anti-globalization movement. I was just wondering, I wasn't able to ask you the question back there, so I feel privileged to be able to ask you right now. Is it a safe distance? I don't know. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on some of the elements that were added into these new forms of trade agreements?
Sure.
And also, is there a likelihood to see any of these elements in NAFTA? Based on your insider information or the trends that you see, is it likely that we see globalization being either redefined or replaced by globalization? Something of that nature.
Sure. Okay. I'll actually base this on outsider information, not insider information. But I think CETA, arguing with Europeans, I think TPP as well, are examples of kind of what we think of as modern trade agreements that go beyond what a traditional trade agreement would be, which is just focused on tariffs, largely on goods. It's just about bringing the tariffs down. We've, over the last couple of decades, really broadened that model out. And what this government in particular has been very focused on is what they call the progressive trade agenda. And how do we bring in issues, things that people worry about when we do a trade agreement? What's the impact on labor rights? What's the impact on indigenous people? What's the impact on the environment? And when we do a trade agreement with another country, when we sign an agreement, how can we have some, how can we be able to turn around and talk to our population about this isn't part of some global race to the bottom, this isn't just about making it easier for multinational corporations to do as they will, to make as much profit as they can, to drive down wages and to despoil the environment. So what are some things that we can do within trade agreements to prevent that from happening and to try and address the concerns of groups who, to John's point earlier, feel left out of this? Because it's very easy to look at these trade agreements and think, well, that's just for big multinational corporations. So what we've been trying to do, indeed, is to have agreements around labor, around environmental standards. You asked about NAFTA. We're certainly pushing there for an indigenous chapter. We'll have something on small business, probably anti-corruption as well, to address some issues in Mexico. And for things like the investor-state dispute mechanisms, ensuring that they don't compromise a government's ability, the government's ability to regulate for the benefit of everyone. So those are the kinds of things that we got in CETA. As I say, they're also present in the TPP, which of course the US has pulled out of. But certainly for NAFTA, those are very much our objectives. Because if trade agreements just seem as if they're just for a narrow group of the population, the reality is politically they won't happen. But I think anyway, we do owe it to all stakeholder groups to ensure that their views are respected. We've, say in NAFTA, we've consulted a lot with folks to try and see what some of the things that we can do. We have to be realistic. There's limits to how far we can push these things. But I think today it would be inconceivable to us to do a trade agreement without having these kinds of provisions in. And hopefully our American counterparts will see it the same way.
All right, so I've got a signal for 4 questions so far. This lady in the front and then the gentleman in the back there.
Hi, I'm Sarah Miller-McCune, and so I'll answer from an American perspective, or rather ask 2 questions of John and Candace. And I'm taking you a little bit from the macro to the micro perspective, if I can. I'm both a publisher and also the president of a family foundation in Santa Barbara County. And we work in 2 counties, Santa Barbara, where I live, and Ventura County adjacent to it, where our company is headquartered. So on the national level, when our company turned, Sage Publications turned 40, which was 12 years ago, the millennial objectives had been established by the UN, as you referred to. They were being advocated by a professor at Columbia University in a very famous book called The End of Poverty, Jeffrey Sachs. And I personally gave $1 million to support, over a 3-year period, 2 villages in Nigeria, which then followed Jeffrey Sachs's outline, worked with his people from Columbia University at the Earth Institute, but it was an interdisciplinary team. And they worked on medical health problems at the grassroots level. They brought in, the malaria nets and all sorts of things. Those 2 villages subsequently worked with the help of the provincial government in Nigeria, one of the more progressive ones, to spread the word to another 100 villages. And the Earth Institute, in turn, did this in a number of other countries adjacent to Nigeria. So what could be done there can be done in many other places and can be done just as easily with the help of UBC and private or business, and because a lot of businesses supported it, but not that many private philanthropists. But you can see what George Soros has done, or other philanthropists who are far wealthier than I. On the local side, in our region, the McKeown Foundation works with activists, particularly regarding the rights of the poor and the underserved. In our area, it tends to be more Mexican Americans or Hispanic, other parts of South and Central America primarily, actually. But there's also a lot of people who are poor who are not of a different racial complexion. They just happen to be poor. And what you can do with them is working to teach them the tools of empowerment. And so we're now trying to set up an institute to do that very thing and take those tools, as we have been doing with individual groups, but now to train trainers how to spread that even further. And so I'd like to ask you to address how that could be done from your perspectives here in Canada. Thank you.
Okay, John, you want to go ahead and respond to that?
Do you want to take a few? Okay, I'll do that one.
Go ahead and then.
I know, first, I want to visit you in Santa Barbara. It's one of the favorite places I've always wanted to go. So, but I know that program very intimately, and I would just make a few points. One is your final one on the role of philanthropy. This is actually one of the most structurally important roles, which I would again argue Margaret Biggs, many of you know, and I co-authored a report where we actually looked at the Canadian philanthropy on these issues, and it's actually extremely modest, and that's a big puzzle. And even on the Giving Pledge, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, the Giving Pledge, there's not a single resident Canadian on that list. And so there's a big movement as to why, and is it a revenue authority issue and so forth. But why is it? We have actually about 35 billionaires, my latest count. Why is it that they're not structurally more systematically involved in these issues? And so I congratulate you on your personal leadership on this. But I would just draw it to, it's exactly this role of experimentation and innovation, because private risk capital, is how I would define philanthropy, plays a crucial role in innovating around these multiplier types initiatives. That particular, I've been to those villages, particular initiative I would draw a different line even, which is, that was about pioneering at a time when the world was saying, well, there are these things, the Millennium Development Goals, they're so big picture. We have AIDS over here, malaria over there. What does it look like for communities to take them on as integrated undertakings? The person who really ran with that was the person named this Nigerian president's special advisor on the Millennium Development Goals. And she said, let's take this model of translating this reality, and actually using the debt relief funds of Nigeria, into ground level realities and measuring it at every step with academic partners. She had $1 billion a year to work with there. You see the multiplier. And she then went on to become the Secretary General's special advisor on what to do after these goals finished. And now she's the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, leading on these roles. So all of these insights go into policy when they're done well. And I think the biggest point on the Millennium Goals, I would stress, is every time we specify one of these issues, one of these problems where what got us to today is not okay, the central question is not, is it right or wrong, in my view. We can agree it's wrong. The central question is, how do we bend the curve towards whatever one's view is the fair arc of justice, the better view of humanity, the environmental success, whatever it is. And the Millennium Goals saved, by my estimate, roughly 25 million extra lives around the world by anchoring that. And so, sorry, I just want to say, it's this actual ability to connect the dots between the ground level reality, the scientific experiment, the risks on policy, and the challenge of scale and ultimately justice that frames the purpose of a school like this.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask you to keep your questions very brief, and we'll get a bunch of them in a row, and then we'll let the panelists each respond to which questions they find compelling. So the gentleman there, right behind the lady who just spoke. Yes. And then you guys.
Okay, I'd like to pick up a little bit on, John, your comment about the policy school being professional translators. And my question is, in what form does the output, the policy output of a policy school have to take in order to get uptake and be communicable to your various constituencies? So, Tim, what form does it have to take in order to get uptake from the civil service? Kim, what form does the output from the school have to take in order to be communicable to your people in a consultation? John, you can maybe take the political one. What form does it have to take in order to be communicable to elected officials? And Candace, I know you're supposed to be the moderator, but what form does it have to take in order to relate to the media positively? I know I can say from a political standpoint, if an elected official cannot see within about 40 seconds how to communicate a policy idea that's presented to them, to their colleagues, to their constituents, to the Parliament, that policy idea is in trouble, regardless of its other merits. So the political the translation of policy to your various constituencies.
Great set of questions, and I would love to let you guys answer, but we'll just get a few more. I think there was 2 hands over here and another lady. There's a bunch of... Stick your hands up if you had a question. It's easier.
Hi, John. As a strategic advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a proud Canadian, I can tell you that there are Canadian billionaires who've met the criteria of the Giving Pledge, but don't want to go public. I just thought that might make everyone feel a little better. As a member of the board of Oxfam, I felt your pain when you were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. I was recruited for strategic and political experience, which I'm having a hard time using because there's a lot of resistance to change in the sector, and I'm not sure our aid community is going to exist as it does now 5 years from now. But I have a question for both you, John, and for Kim. What do you think we can do to align our domestic and global giving agendas so that we can help ourselves achieve the SDG while helping others? Thank you.
Okay, so I've just been told by Moura we have like 4 more minutes. So we're going to let this lady with her hand up ask a question, and then we'll let the panelists respond. And I'm so sorry to those of you who had your hand up. And there's lunch to talk to him.
Hi, my name is Tracy, and I'm from the 2017 MPPJ program. I have a question for Tim. As you know that the APEC 2017 is happening in Vietnam right now, and the Canadian government has been very active coming to Vietnam, organize events, trying to promote economic partnership with Vietnam and other ASEAN countries. And just last Monday, there's an event in Ho Chi Minh City where UBC professor and Canadian expert coming to talk about disruptive innovation of startup and MSME. But then over the last year, I went back to Vietnam, which is my home country, to work for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We try to organize networking event, connect Canadian business and Vietnamese business, but then we did it on our own without help or like strong support from the Canadian government. And personally, I haven't felt a strong presence of Canadian business in Vietnam. So I want to ask him that what are the policy, the future plan of the Canadian government coming to the market in Vietnam or other ASEAN country? Thank you.
Okay. All right, Kim, do you want to start? You respond to any of those 3 questions.
Sure. I will respond to Preston Manning's question about making things communicable to Indigenous community, as the case may be, for coming out of a public policy school. I think really it needs to be co-developed with the people it impacts for it to be received. So I think Indigenous people are pretty sick of being studied by all sorts of people who have good intentions but haven't bothered to involve Indigenous people in planning solutions for their issues. So quite simply, I think that's the first step.
On that, I would just say, only to underscore subject, not object. That's a crucial thing in policy analysis, is that everyone is a principal in their own life, and that needs to be understood at every step. But on the communication, I would only say you need to speak the language of the person you're talking with. And so that is a skill. It is refined. It is practiced. It is not flip a switch and you're there. The ability to talk with, in this country, conservatives versus NDP versus liberal versus green, for example, even there you need to have different points of reference for different viewpoints that people might be bringing to a conversation, even if each one's only 40 seconds. And you similarly need to be able to go to, there are many politicians who need the anecdote to sell the story. There are many scientists who will throw you out of the room if you start with an anecdote because they want to see this evidence. And even knowing that is central to one's undertaking. On the local and global, I would just say very quickly, I think that we need to understand on so many of these issues where we're talking about solving global problems, they are also about solving local problems, because every global problem is happening somewhere. That's the first thing. But the second thing is many of them are deeply interconnected. We could go through 10 major global policy issues, and I can tell you which discipline has an angle on it, because everyone does, whether it's the Sahel, whether it's Syria, whether it's the South China Sea, whether it's anything in between. So many issues, so many disciplines. But the flip side is, if you cannot approach this from a vantage point of leadership by example, and this is what I think I would argue the point that Canada needs to keep getting better at under the new generation of leadership we're seeing at all levels of society. If you just think that every problem needs to get solved by someone else and you're not willing to show how you're solving it yourself, you actually make it harder to solve the bigger problem. So the ability to solve our Indigenous nations' issues and Indigenous people's issues is crucial, not just as an end into itself. It's a crucial thing as an end into itself. It's crucial for our ability to talk with the world, that we're not just talking at them, we're talking with them about our problems and their problems and the collective problems. And we need to understand that really applies on pretty much every issue we're thinking about at home today.
Tim, we'll give you the last word.
Okay, thanks. Beginning with Vietnam, I'm quite involved in the APEC process, and I've went to Vietnam a few months ago. I think Vietnam's, clearly when you go there, it feels like China 15 years ago. The same sense of potential, the same sense of a country that's going somewhere. I'm very optimistic about our economic possibilities in Vietnam. We've just actually launched exploratory talks for an FTA with the ASEAN group, which includes Vietnam, but also some fast-growing countries in the region, like Indonesia, for instance. So we're certainly going to be putting quite a lot of effort into that region as a whole, but Vietnam in particular. Going to the other question about how to communicate, it really is a great question. Because you've got to, I think academics do sometimes fall down on this, you've got to, when they enter the public policy sphere, you've got to think about your audience and what is it your customer, think of your customer and what do they want. And I'll speak particularly to the civil service side. What is it that civil servants want from you? I'll give you an example. Because economists think about the environment. Economists think a lot about how to address the problem of global warming, and a lot of economists will come down on the carbon tax, and they'll rush to civil servants to say, hey, we've got this really great idea of the carbon tax. This is what you should do. Check the mathematics. It all kind of works out. And other people will go to civil service and look, we've got this big problem, global warming. You should really take global warming seriously. It's really a problem. No, really is a problem, okay? And the reality is you don't have to convince us of that. There's more agreement on what the big problems are and what the general outlines of a solution are among the civil service than you might think. What we really want to know is, because what we're paid to do is, ministers come with bright ideas or academics come with bright ideas, is to point out the 10 things that are potentially wrong with it, or the 10 potential pitfalls, the potential pitfalls people should think about. So we're actually focused on specific problems. One specific problem with the carbon tax is, what do you do about the border? What do you do about goods that come in from other countries that haven't paid this carbon tax? That makes some of our industries less competitive, and that will generate political noise for our masters. So how do we deal with that? And what's a good idea on that issue? Another issue that we have is federally we don't have complete jurisdiction over all of these tools. How would we bring the provinces in? Can we force them to come in? Should we do that? What are the tools that we have if we expect? So those kinds of practical questions, those are what we're really looking for. And in order to know that, you have to engage with us and have had a bit of a conversation about what is the exact problem that we're trying to solve. And then the other part of that, as was mentioned, I think very well, is exactly. Politicians, they want to know how they're going to explain this. That is their job, is to explain things to the population and try and get buy-in. And often, when things don't move ahead, it's not because people aren't agreed that it's a good policy idea. It's just that the politicians know that there's just no way to sell this properly. So you have to think about the marketing of your product, and you have to think about not just how good your analysis of the situation or your big picture idea, but how do you deal with the potential objections that civil service might have, some of the practical issues, and then how is it actually solved in the political realm? Because at the end of the day, we are a democracy, and it is ultimately the voters who make decisions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. It seems like you guys have your work cut out for you here to create an engaged policy school that shifts policy infrastructure so that it listens to the impact that it's having, so that it reflects the diversity in this country. I traveled across Canada's north last year, and I only refer to Canada as a multilingual country now. Because if you go across the north, you know that. You feel it in your bones as Indigenous broadcasters are speaking in multiple languages. And we want a policy school that reflects our shared history and a shared sense of what that history is. So good luck. Thank you so much to the panelists. And it's been wonderful as a Tahltan person to be on unceded Musqueam land.